Darrell Brooks, the driver of the red SUV, the man responsible for the Waukesha Massacre, driving through a parade during the holidays, running through the dancing grannies, killing a number of very important people in the local community, had a court date, a preliminary hearing, and we're going to go through it in its entirety. It's about 45 minutes long. I clipped out the highlights, some of the juicy bits, and we're going to learn more about what the government's case looks like. We're going to hear from Detective Casey, who details what his investigation led him to conclude. He was there actually on the hood of Darrell Brooks's car and then reviewed a lot of the video footage in the aftermath of the tragedy. Then we're going to hear and start to piece together what the defense is hinting at. Idea being Darrell Brooks was sort of caught in this haze. He couldn't hear anything. He couldn't think straight. It was an accident. It was a panic-caused incident, and he didn't have the intention in order to go do this stuff. So let's break this down. Let's start at the very top. We're going to see that Detective Casey is going to be in the upper top right. You see, he is being sworn in this clip. Judge Kevin Costello, he's actually a court commissioner, so he's going to be here in the top left, and he's going to be presiding over this hearing. Down in the bottom left, we see the prosecution table. We've got 3 different prosecutors, but only this woman here on the right of this box is actually going to be doing any of the direct examination. And then we've got Darrell Brooks and his counsel down here in the bottom right. Darrell Brooks, of course, in red, and his counsel, this woman here on the far left of our screen, Darrell Brooks' right, is going to be the defense attorney doing the cross-examination. And so this is a preliminary exam. It's sort of like an early, kind of like a trial version 0.5. It's only intended, the government has to prove that there's enough here to move this case forward, enough probable cause to say some sort of felony was committed. We have the right to continue to hold Darrell Brooks in custody. We're going to hold him over for felony proceedings. But you got to start somewhere. You can't just say, well, we're just going to hold you indefinitely without any real proceeding, without any due process, indefinitely for maybe 2, 3, 4 years up until a trial happens. You got to make a showing that even the process is justified before you ever even get to a trial. And so this is going to resemble a trial. Think of it like a very pared down version of the trial. We're going to have one witness. We're only going to talk about a few issues. Don't need to get into all the nuts and bolts. The judge is really just asking himself, is there enough here to charge this guy? So we're going to start. The government calls out Detective Casey. He's going to be sworn in, and then we'll get into the testimony.
Further testimony you're about to give in this matter before the court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Detective, if you could have a seat, state your first and last name, spell it for the record, and then Attorney Apple could take it from there.
Thomas Casey, C-A-S-E-Y.
And how are you employed, sir?
As a detective for the City of Waukesha Police Department.
How long have you worked in law enforcement?
Over 24 years.
I'd like to direct your attention to the date of November 21, 2021. Were you on duty that afternoon, sir?
Yes, I was.
And what was your assignment?
Traffic control position for the Waukesha Christmas Parade.
And as a traffic control officer, how were you dressed?
I was wearing a police jacket that had Waukesha Police on each shoulder. I also had a knit cap on that said police on the front of it. And I had a traffic safety vest on that said police on the front and rear of the vest.
Okay, so you would consider yourself in uniform that day?
Yes, I was.
Clearly identifiable, and they're sort of trying to pre-butt the defense line of argument that Darrell Brooks didn't know anything about an officer telling him to stop. He was totally confused. In fact, he may have been high on marijuana even. He couldn't hear anything that was happening, and so they're trying to say, but he could see your shoulder, it said police, and he could see your cap, it said police. And there were many of you dressed that way, all on traffic patrol. What happened next? Let's listen.
Initially, the area that I was assigned to on White Rock Avenue, we closed that down at 1 p.m. because that was the staging area for the parade. So between Baxter Street and Main Street, there was no cars allowed on there after 1 p.m.
Okay.
And then the rest of the route, a little after 3 p.m., they started to close down and not allow traffic on there.
Okay.
1 to 3 p.m. road closures start. He's a uniformed officer helping to facilitate that. Parade's about to happen. 1 p.m. they start most road closures, but there are some that will kind of be open as they're clearing them out until 3. Then we see this officer has contact with Mr. Darrell Brooks and his red SUV. He says that he heard first about this call about somebody leaving with a knife fight. We've heard a lot about this. Is Darrell Brooks the person who is fleeing this incident? Here's how Detective Casey addresses it.
Now, I want to direct your attention to the time of approximately 4:35 p.m. that day. What happened at that time?
I overheard on the radio that squads were dispatched to the area of Frame Park for a reported fight that involved somebody with a knife.
Okay. Did you respond to that?
I did not.
You maintained your post
Yes, I did.
and continued to direct traffic.
Yes.
At some point, did you observe a vehicle that drew your attention?
Yes, I did.
What kind of vehicle was it?
It was a red Ford Escape.
And what was it about the vehicle that drew your attention to it?
Well, first of all, the parade route was closed down. There was no vehicles allowed on the parade route. But initially I heard a horn beeping from the area north of my location, and that's what my initial focus was drawn to.
Okay. And from the best of your knowledge, was it that red Ford Escape that was honking its horn?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
So Darrell Brooks, red Ford Escape, honking his horn, hears about this incident but doesn't respond, sees the car, first incident comes out. Now, he steps in front of Darrell Brooks's vehicle. He wants to stop him because he's part of the road closure team. He's been there all afternoon closing streets starting at 1 p.m. and he sees this vehicle coming through honking his horn. He steps in front of the vehicle.
When you saw the SUV, what did you do?
I first stepped in front of the SUV, put my hands up, and was yelling for the vehicle to stop.
Okay. Did the vehicle stop?
It did not.
Were you positioned directly in front of the vehicle?
Yes, I was.
And what happened?
The vehicle continued driving into me. I'd say it was a slow speed at that point. Eventually, the vehicle made contact with me, and I was pounding on the hood, yelling for it to stop, which it did not.
Could you see anybody inside the vehicle?
At that point, I could not see the person real clearly, but as the vehicle continued pushing through me, I was, my position changed to the side of the vehicle where I was directly outside the driver's side window, and I could see inside of the window and I could see the driver very clearly.
Were there any other occupants in the vehicle at that time?
I did not see any.
Okay. And the driver of that vehicle, do you see that person present in the courtroom here today?
Yes, I do.
Could you identify him, please?
He's sitting at the defense table dressed all in red.
You know the name of that person?
Darrell Brooks.
So Officer Detective Casey sort of is reenacting this for us, saying that he sees this vehicle coming, it's honking, he steps out in front of it, and the vehicle's kind of slow. And so we've all kind of been in that moment where you're walking through a crosswalk or in a parking lot or something, and a car kind of comes, it doesn't look like they're stopping. You're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. He says, I palmed it. And he's actually, it sounds like touching the hood of the car. And so he's bracing himself and the vehicle makes contact. As he mentioned previously, he's in full uniform. You can see police at the top. You can see police on the shoulders, clearly an officer, shouting, stop, 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 palming the hood of the car. And Darrell Brooks is slow, but then accelerates again. As he's pushing into him, he says he kind of rolls off to the side. The vehicle is going by him. He looks into the driver's side window, positively identifies Darrell Brooks. At that moment now, he's still trying to get him to stop. He's pounding on the side of the driver's window.
As he drove past you in the vehicle, did you make any further effort to stop the vehicle?
I pounded on the driver's side of the window and continued to yell at the person to stop.
Did the vehicle stop?
It did not.
Were there parade participants in the street at this time?
Yes, there were.
Okay. Where did you see the vehicle go?
The vehicle continued westbound on Main Street.
And could you see any activity involving the truck at that point?
Yes, initially I began chasing after the vehicle to try to get it to stop. And as I was following behind the vehicle, I could see it was on the north side of the roadway, at times beeping its horn. Eventually its speed increased where I could not keep up with it. And then it continued further west on Main Street.
So you were chasing the vehicle on foot?
Yes.
Okay. Trying to run behind it and catch up?
Correct.
Okay. Did you see the vehicle actually strike any persons at that point?
Not in person.
Okay.
Detective Casey says that he was pounding on the door, pounding on the window, shouting, had his palm on the hood of the car, and he's giving verbal commands to stop the vehicle. He also says that Darrell Brooks is sort of accelerating into him, and as he rolls off to the side, Darrell Brooks accelerates away. And he starts to chase him. Darrell Brooks, in the meantime, is honking his horn as he's going around. Now, at this time, Detective Casey does not see anything in terms of him hitting anybody, because this is at the early onset of the massacre. But he does say that other officers, as this was all getting started, tried to stop Mr. Brooks.
Do you know if there were other officers along the route that took any effort to stop the vehicle?
Multiple officers.
Had you alerted the other officers to what was happening?
Yes, I broadcast on the radio that a vehicle had entered the parade route, specifically a Ford Escape, and that we needed squad's emergency response to try to stop it.
Okay. Are you aware of other officers attempting to stop the vehicle further west on Main Street?
Yes, I am.
Did the vehicle stop for those officers?
It did not.
Those officers were in full police uniform?
Yes.
So maybe Darrell Brooks just mistook that first officer. Maybe it was just a mistake. He thought it was just a maniac, some crazed person who was trying to carjack him or steal from him or something. But every other officer who was also there throughout the rest of the parade route doesn't seem likely. And so the prosecution is asking about that because they're going to say, well, maybe this was a mistake. But if it's 5 or 6 officers, all in uniform, all part of a parade shouting stop, it would be extremely unreasonable for that person to not stop. So here now, Detective Casey, who was a part of the lead investigation here, who was there at the scene, he also went and found a bunch of videos and reviewed all of them, and he's going to detail what he uncovered. Now, I didn't see this stuff firsthand, but he did see it on recording from different areas, different versions, locations at the scene.
Tell us what you saw on the videos as the SUV traveled down Main Street, please.
Initially, as the vehicle was traveling on Main Street, I would say between White Rock and Barstow Street, the vehicle stays on the north side of the roadway. As it's driving, it's beeping its horn, slowing down. Once it crosses Barstow Street, the vehicle continues driving at a faster speed. It increases its speed, and it begins to do a zigzagging motion through the crowd. At some point...
I'm sorry, I just want to clarify. When you say crowd, are you talking about the participants in the middle of the street or the spectators on the side of the road?
The participants in the parade.
Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
As it's between Barstow and Broadway, the vehicle zigzagging through the crowd, hitting people, running people over. And then as it approaches Clinton Street, the vehicle increases its speed even more. The vehicle is zigzagging through the crowd where there's no vehicles, and it appears that the vehicle's intentionally aiming for people. At one point in the video, you can see the vehicle running over people. At one point, there's someone on the hood of the car where the vehicle jams on its brakes, appears to have the person come off the hood of the car, and then continues driving and drives over that person. As it gets to the 400 block, it hits another group of people and then continues driving westbound.
Okay.
Bad testimony for the defense. There you can see that it sounds like this is not a vehicle malfunction. This is not a mistake. He actually is accelerating, stopping, and accelerating again. Hits somebody. They're on the front of his car. Hits the brakes just like in the movies. The person goes flying off the front of it, and he starts over again. So what we're trying to sort of see the prosecution do is rebut any of the defense and what they're going to come out and say, that this was all an accident, a mistake, a misidentification, didn't know it was a police officer, and on and on and on. So here we get some details about the gruesome consequences, the tragedy that happened here. They say specifically that he drives and hits the band.
Suddenly swerves to the left, and at that point it first hits the drum player and continues, and I would say it hits approximately 10 people and runs directly over the top of them, and then turns to the right and starts hitting other people in the parade route.
Okay. Some spectators were injured in this area as well?
Correct.
Okay. These Waukesha South band members, they would all be teenagers or high school aged kids?
Yes.
And were all 10 people injured to your knowledge?
Yes, they were.
Some of them suffering great bodily harm?
Yes.
And all of them were directly in the roadway at the time of this?
Yes.
Burris Logistics Group was the next unit, is that correct?
Yes.
And was anybody participating in that group injured?
Yes, 2 people, a mother and daughter.
Okay. They were both directly struck by Mr. Brooks' vehicle?
Yes, they were.
Okay. I believe the Blazers baseball team was then encountered in the area of 264 West Main Street. Does that sound right, sir?
Correct.
And tell us what happened with the Blazers baseball team, please.
The vehicle started to pass on the left. Initially, it made contact with a young child and adult that were pushed between a pickup truck and eventually thrown ahead and hit multiple other participants that were in the center of the roadway.
Okay. Were any members of the Blazers baseball team injured as a result of Mr. Brooks striking them with his vehicle?
Yes, they were.
About how many?
I believe it was 10.
And were there any fatalities associated with the Blazers baseball team?
Yes, there was one.
And that was victim F?
Correct.
And what was the cause of death determined for victim F?
Cranial cerebral traumatic injuries.
So they're going through the elements of the various offenses. Darrell Brooks was also charged with a number of additional offenses. Remember, when we first talked about this on this channel, I think it was in this video, somewhere up here, we had a long conversation about the fact that he was just charged with, I think, just 6 counts at the time of intentional homicide. And we said, oh, he's going to get charged with a whole slew of additional charges. Everybody who didn't die, right, that's, attempted murder or vehicular manslaughter or whatever it's categorized at here in this jurisdiction. But it is something where he's going to be facing a lot more. And so the prosecutor is just going through all the different elements, making sure that this detective is hitting them. We have another just horrific scene. Sounds like as he was running through, there was a group there in Waukesha called the Dancing Grannies, and he's driving through there and he's sort of sticking his head out the window to make sure he can see as he's continuing his carnage.
Did the vehicle stop at that point after striking the Dancing Grannies?
It did not.
What happened after the vehicle, Mr. Brooks, cleared the Dancing Grannies?
At one point, you can see the vehicle suddenly slow down, appeared to get somebody up the windshield of the car. There's one citizen witness that said that Mr. Brooks was actually had his head out the window, trying to see around the other people as he was driving.
Just terrible stuff. And the last sort of thing I wanted to touch on from the prosecutor, I believe it's the last clip, is where she's asking specifically about the vehicle conditions. One of the first things that many people were speculating was this was a mistake. It was a vehicle malfunction. The accelerator got stuck or something. Now, a lot of that goes out the window when you have a detective saying, no, he was braking and accelerating and stopping and going and trying to maneuver the vehicle into different groups of people, not zigzagging to avoid them, but actually going into them. Now, we also have the issue of the horn. Why is he honking the horn? Some people were thinking maybe the horn was to warn people, my vehicle's out of control. I can't control this thing. Move, 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 move. I don't want to hit you. But they checked the car. They checked the vehicle. Was there a stuck accelerator? Was there a mechanical problem? Detective says no.
Just one last matter, Mr. Detective Casey. Did we make any effort to determine the functionality of the vehicle after the incident had occurred?
Yes, we have.
What happened?
We had the Wisconsin State Patrol Mechanical Inspection Unit do an inspection on the vehicle while it was at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab.
And what was determined?
It was determined that there is nothing on the vehicle that was defective that would make the vehicle so it would not stop or accelerate. They found that a tie rod end had a little bit of extra play in it, and there was one mismatched tire. Other than that, they did not find anything mechanical wrong with the vehicle.
Okay.
So not an accident, not a malfunction. It was intentional. Everything was working fine. He was controlling the vehicle, totally operational and under his volition. So now we get the defense. So we have one witness, Detective Casey, direct examination. He comes out, gives us a lot of the elements that justify the probable cause to bring this thing forward. And so the defense is going to ask him some questions. Now, in a case like this, the defense has their work cut out for them, obviously. But we are seeing what the skeleton of the defense is looking like. First of all, the parade is very loud. Darrell Brooks is confused. She's not intentionally trying to do any of this stuff. He doesn't know what the heck is going on. He thinks somebody's out to kill him. Parade's loud. He can't hear these commands. Here's what that sounds like.
Now, this is a parade, right? So it's loud. There's lots of activity and music and people talking. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
And you were describing before on direct examination that there were some gaps between groups of participants. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So there's different groups of participants who are walking down the street, correct?
Correct.
And there's an amount of space between each group, correct?
I wouldn't necessarily say each group, but some groups, some are closer. Every once in a while, there's a group that's a little bit slower than another group, and it allows a space. So I wouldn't say every group, but some groups there are.
So there are spots where there's nobody walking, correct?
Correct.
And when there are those spots where there's nobody actually walking in the street, there are still spectators on the side of the street, perhaps on the sidewalk, sitting on the curb, things like that, correct?
Correct.
So you can see where she's going with this. The idea being, one, he can't hear anything. It's loud. It's a parade. Officers might be barking orders at him, but he can't hear. And number two, there's people everywhere. There's spectators on the side of the road. So if he's not zigzagging and he's just going straight, he's just going to be running straight into people. So he's actually attempting to zigzag to not hit people because there are other spectators on the side of the street. That's why he's zigzagging. So she's trying to really attack the intentionality of this, to say that it wasn't actually something that he was wanting to do to hit people, but he had just sort of lost control and had a panic. Here is where she goes into this a little bit further. Now, I skip a part where she's talking about him potentially being high on marijuana, but she does bring this up, right? That they tested him, his eyes were bloodshot and watery, and he looked like he might be under the influence of it. And that goes to show, or tends to support the argument that he may have been confused and he didn't see much or couldn't comprehend what was happening. But she dives back in on the window. And remember what we heard from the officer, that he was actually pounding on the door. Here, the defense attorney is going to say, yeah, but the windows were up, right? They were not cracked. And so maybe he actually couldn't hear what you were saying.
When you were having contact with this vehicle, did you notice that the windows were up or down?
I believe that they were all up.
So all the windows were closed on this Ford Escape. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you could not see inside through an open window. Is that correct? You would have been looking through the glass.
Correct.
The windows were not cracked open at all.
Not that I recall.
I don't think that's going to be a winning argument, especially given the fact that he was pounding on the door and there were a number of other officers. I thought that maybe she was going for sort of an identification argument, that maybe they got the wrong guy, because remember that Darrell Brooks went actually around, abandoned the car, went to try to go and seek refuge in somebody's house until the police came and got him. And so you might say, well, maybe it was the wrong identity, right? They got the wrong guy or something like that. But the detective positively identified him. And so now we see sort of the last line of inquiry from the defense, specifically talking about the photos that they showed him. So when they brought Darrell Brooks back in for a line of questioning, they said, hey, Mr. Brooks, look what you did here. Look what you have done here in our loving community, just like you see in the movies. Look at you. Look at this. They show him the photographs, and he was hurting when he saw them. And the defense attorneys are going to be trying to make this argument that maybe this was something that was abusive or duress or was cruel and unusual or some sort of a violation of his rights. Let's see how this sounds.
Ultimately, the driver of the vehicle was arrested, you said, somewhere on Elizabeth.
General Mr. Brooks?
Yes.
Yes.
You identified him as Darrell Brooks, correct?
Correct.
And was it you who took him into custody or a different officer?
Other officers.
He spent then a period of time with officers after being arrested, correct?
Correct.
And at that point, one of the officers who spent time with him reported an odor of marijuana about his person, correct?
Correct.
In fact, that officer reported that Mr. Brooks had red, bloodshot, glassy eyes, correct?
Correct.
And he could smell an odor of burnt marijuana on him, correct?
Correct.
And then one of the officers, or a couple of the officers, I think, attempted to interrogate Mr. Brooks. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That was not you, though, correct?
That is correct.
you reviewed reports of those other law enforcement officers who spoke with Mr. Brooks, correct? And those detectives showed Mr. Brooks photos and videos of this incident occurring. Is that correct?
Correct.
While those officers were showing Mr. Brooks photos and videos, he did not want to look at them. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
In fact, he would put his head down, correct?
Correct.
He'd turn his head away from the photos and the videos. Is that correct?
Correct.
And at one point, he even begged the law enforcement officer to stop showing them to him, correct?
I believe so.
So you can see where they're going to go with that argument, right? They were abusing him. They were violating his rights because he was refusing to talk to them, put his head down, and they kept trying to go with this to get answers out of him. So she's going to key that one up. And then lastly, she says, when you first got questions out of him, when he started answering, he said he didn't mean to do any of this, didn't he? Here's what she says.
And lastly, Mr. Brooks indicated to one of the detectives that, quote, "I didn't mean to kill nobody," end quote. Is that correct?
I believe that's a quote.
I have nothing further.
Thank you. Attorney Apper, any redirect?
Nothing further from the defense. We get a little bit of redirect, but you can see what the defense is trying to do here. Number one, he couldn't hear anything. He was confused. The whole thing was just an accident. There was a constitutional abuse, a violation that happened here. They were showing him photos. He did not want to be interrogated. He put his head down. They kept showing him the photos anyways, saying that he had no intention, right? That he, from the very beginning of his line of questioning, he said, I didn't intend to kill anybody, is what he said. And then you can see what the defense is doing with the zigzagging argument. Well, he had no choice but to zigzag because he was trying to actually avoid people. What you think is him trying to hit people looks like him trying to avoid people. Saying that the officer testified that he actually did slow down at some points, although I think that actually hurts their argument because it shows that he accelerated again. If he could slow down, he could have slowed down. But if the defense wants to sort of reverse that again, they'll say he was in panic, he was in fear, he wasn't thinking straight, and so he thought he was being chased or he was in fear for his life for whatever reason. We haven't figured out what that was, but it could have been the knife fight that they were talking about earlier that even Dr. Casey said came across the radio. We also know, and this is not a good argument, that Darrell Brooks was wanted in other cases, and so that might show that he was trying to flee but not necessarily intending to kill, right? And so you can see this might be sort of a last-ditch effort from the defense to try to just reduce this down from an intentional homicide to something lower like a negligent homicide or a vehicular manslaughter or something like that. Don't think that's going to happen, but you can see what they're trying to do, and they do have some arguments, even in a case like this where it seems like the evidence is overwhelming. They have some things to talk about. Whether they're any good, I'll let you decide. The judge now, of course, is going to give the ruling. And remember what the judge is intending to do here. We just need to get enough information to answer the question. Is there enough for a criminal charge here? Not that this person is convicted or guilty. We're not trying to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. We just need like 51%. If it's more likely than not, if it's probable that this thing happened, then there's enough to hang on to this case as it goes through the process. And the judge, of course, is going to conclude accordingly.
Pursuant to what the law is, my decision on whether or not the state has presented sufficient evidence to show that the defendant probably committed a felony or felonies within the jurisdiction of the court. There is ample evidence on all fronts as far as each of the group of counts, the counts 1 through 6, counts 7 through 67, 63 or 68, strike that, through 73, and then the felony bail jumps 74, 75. Each of those were discussed. There is ample evidence on each of those to show, sir, that you probably committed a felony or felonies within the jurisdiction of this court. And based upon that, I am going to bind you over for trial.
All right, so he's going to get an arraignment in a later date. I believe it's February 11th or 18th. It doesn't matter. We're going to follow it whenever it happens to be. And so my question to you, of course, is what do you think about the defense and their line of questioning? Do you think it's even remotely at all likely that they'll be successful with any of the claims that this wasn't, in fact, intentional? That maybe he was sort of in a panic, this mental health emergency type of situation that would result in no intentionality, that he didn't intend to go do any of this stuff? Would that reduce the culpability, criminal liability in your mind? I'm not so sure it does in mine, but it is still something that the defense is going to have to make their arguments about. And they're going to do it, and we're going to continue to follow it along. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I would love it if you stuck around as we continue to follow this case and many others. Hit that subscribe button. Leave us a like before you get out of here, because I would love to see you on the next one.